The fog rolled in thick that Tuesday evening at Camp Pendleton, swallowing the shooting range like a gray beast hungry for visibility. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez watched from the observation tower as another group of Marines stumbled through the night target practice, their shots echoing uselessly into the darkness. For 3 weeks straight, every single Marine had failed this particular drill. The night vision equipment seemed useless against the unpredictable California coastal fog, and morale was sinking faster than the sun behind the Pacific. Maria had seen tough training before. She had been through 2 deployments in Afghanistan, survived IED explosions that left her ears ringing for months, and earned her stripes the hard way. But this was different. This was systematic failure on a scale that made her stomach turn. The drill was designed to simulate real combat conditions where Marines would need to engage targets in low-visibility situations. It wasn't just about hitting targets anymore, it was about survival skills that could mean the difference between coming home alive or in a flag-draped coffin. The latest group of 8 Marines approached the firing line with the same defeated posture she had seen all week. Their instructor, Sergeant Johnson, barked orders that seemed to bounce off the fog and disappear into nothing. The targets were placed at various distances between 50 and 200 meters, barely visible even with the best night vision equipment the Corps had to offer. Each Marine would get 5 shots to hit at least 3 targets. So far, the best anyone had managed was 1 lucky hit out of 5 attempts. Among the group was Private First Class Sarah Chen, a 22-year-old from Sacramento who had joined the Marines 6 months earlier. Sarah was small in stature but had already proven herself during basic training with exceptional marksmanship scores during daylight hours. Her drill instructors had noted her unusual ability to remain calm under pressure, a trait that served her well during the chaos of military training. Tonight, however, she looked as uncertain as the others as she adjusted her gear and checked her weapon for the 3rd time. The first Marine stepped up to the line. The sound of his breathing was audible even from Maria's position in the tower. He raised his rifle, peered through his scope, and fired. The shot went wide, disappearing into the fog without even disturbing the targets. 4 more shots followed with similar results. He stepped back, shaking his head in frustration. The pattern continued with the next Marine, and the next. By the time it was Sarah's turn, 7 Marines had failed completely. Sarah approached the firing line differently than the others. While they had all rushed to get their shots off quickly, as if speed might somehow compensate for the impossible conditions, she took her time. She knelt in the standard firing position but, then, did something unexpected. Instead of immediately raising her rifle, she closed her eyes and simply listened. The fog seemed to muffle most sounds, but she could hear the slight creaking of the target frame swing in the coastal breeze. She could hear the distant sound of waves hitting the shore about a mile away. Most importantly, she could hear her own heartbeat and breathing. Maria watched with interest from her position. In all her years of military service, she had never seen a Marine take this approach to a marksmanship drill. Sarah remained motionless for nearly a full minute, just breathing and listening. Sergeant Johnson started to say something, probably to hurry her along, but Maria held up her hand to stop him. Something about Sarah's demeanor suggested she had a plan. When Sarah finally opened her eyes and raised her rifle, her movements were deliberate and controlled. She didn't fight the fog or try to penetrate it with sheer determination like the others. Instead, she seemed to work with it, moving her rifle in small, measured adjustments. Through her scope, she had noticed something the others had missed. The fog wasn't completely uniform. There were subtle variations in density, tiny pockets where visibility was slightly better than others. These pockets shifted and moved with the air currents, creating brief windows of opportunity. Her first shot rang out across the range. Through the fog, they heard the distinctive ping of metal on metal, a hit. The other Marines looked up in surprise. Even Sergeant Johnson seemed taken aback. Sarah had hit the closest target, 50 meters away, but that was still more than anyone else had accomplished all week. She adjusted her position slightly and fired again. Another hit, this time on the 75-meter target. The silence that followed was different from the frustrated quiet after the other Marines' attempts. This was the silence of disbelief and growing hope. Sarah continued her methodical approach, taking nearly 30 seconds between each shot. She wasn't rushing, wasn't letting the pressure of the situation force her into hasty decisions. Her breathing remained steady, her movements controlled. The 3rd shot was her most ambitious yet. The 150-meter target was barely a shadow in the fog, more of a suggestion than a visible object. Sarah closed her eyes again for a moment, as if consulting some internal guidance system that the others lacked access to. When she fired, the sound seemed to hang in the air longer than usual. Then came the ping, another hit. By now, every Marine on the range was watching Sarah with intense focus. Even the Marines who had already failed their attempts had gathered around to see if she could do the impossible. Maria found herself leaning forward in the tower, her own breathing synchronized with Sarah's deliberate rhythm. This wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. This was about solving a puzzle that had stumped everyone for weeks. Sarah's fourth shot was aimed at the most distant target, 200 meters away. At that distance, even in perfect daylight conditions, it would be a challenging shot for most Marines. In this fog, it seemed impossible. Sarah took even more time with this attempt, nearly a full minute of careful adjustment and breathing. When she fired, the silence stretched so long that everyone began to assume she had missed. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound they were all waiting for, the ping of a successful hit. The range erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah had accomplished what no Marine had managed in 3 weeks of trying. She had hit 4 out of 5 targets in conditions that had seemed impossible. As she stood up and shouldered her rifle, her expression remained calm and focused, as if what she had just done was perfectly normal. Maria climbed down from the observation tower, her mind racing with questions. How had Sarah succeeded where everyone else had failed? What had she seen or understood that the others had missed? As a staff sergeant, Maria had seen plenty of exceptional marksmanship, but this was something different. This was problem-solving under pressure, adaptation to impossible conditions, and a level of focus that bordered on the supernatural. When Maria reached the firing line, she found Sarah cleaning her rifle with the same methodical attention she had shown during the shooting. The other Marines were gathered around her, asking rapid-fire questions about her technique and how she had managed to see through the fog. Sarah answered politely but seemed more interested in properly maintaining her weapon than in explaining her success. "Private Chen," Maria said, approaching the group. "That was exceptional shooting. I'd like to understand your approach." Sarah looked up from her rifle and stood at attention. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I just tried to work with the conditions instead of fighting them." "Explain that," Maria said. She genuinely wanted to understand what had just happened. If Sarah had discovered a technique that could help other Marines succeed in similar conditions, it could save lives in real combat situations. Sarah glanced around at the other Marines listening intently. "The fog isn't solid," she said simply. "It moves and changes. If you watch carefully and time your shots with the natural shifts in density, you can find moments when visibility improves just enough. Also, the targets make small sounds when the wind moves them. If you listen while you aim, you can confirm their exact position even when you can't see them clearly." The explanation made sense, but Maria suspected there was more to it than Sarah was letting on. The level of focus and intuition required to execute such a strategy under pressure suggested natural abilities that went beyond standard Marine training. This was the kind of talent that could be developed and used to help others overcome similar challenges. As the group began to pack up their equipment, Maria made a decision that would change the trajectory of Sarah's military career. She would recommend Sarah for advanced marksmanship training and possibly instructor development. But first, she wanted to see if Sarah's success tonight was a fluke or if she could repeat her performance under different conditions. "Private Chen," Maria called as Sarah prepared to leave with the others. "Report to my office tomorrow at 0800. I want to discuss some additional training opportunities." Sarah nodded professionally. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." As the Marines disappeared into the fog, heading back to their barracks, Maria remained on the range for a few more minutes. The fog continued to roll in from the Pacific, thick and impenetrable. Tomorrow night, another group of Marines would face the same challenge that had defeated so many others. But now, thanks to Sarah's unexpected breakthrough, there might be hope for a solution. The sound of waves in the distance reminded Maria of her own early days in the Corps, when everything seemed impossible until suddenly, it wasn't. She had learned that the Marine Corps had a way of bringing out abilities in people that they never knew they possessed. Tonight, she had witnessed that transformation in real time. Walking back toward the base buildings, Maria began planning how to turn Sarah's individual success into a training methodology that could help other Marines. The fog might have met its match in one small Marine from Sacramento, but the real test would be whether that success could be shared and replicated. In the Marine Corps, individual excellence was celebrated, but shared knowledge that saved lives was what really mattered. The night had started like so many others, with failure and frustration hanging as thick as the coastal fog. But it was ending with possibility, with proof that even the most challenging conditions could be overcome with the right approach and mindset. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had shown that the impossible was simply a problem that hadn't been solved yet. The morning sun cut through the remaining wisps of fog as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez sat in her office, reviewing Sarah Chen's service record for the third time. The file showed a consistent pattern of excellence, but nothing that would have predicted last night's breakthrough. Sarah had grown up in an urban environment, no hunting or shooting experience before joining the Marines. Her initial marksmanship scores were good but not exceptional. What had happened on the range defied easy explanation. At exactly 0800, Sarah knocked on Maria's door and entered when called. She stood at attention with the same calm demeanor she had displayed during the impossible shooting exercise. Maria gestured for her to sit down, choosing to conduct this conversation more informally than a typical military briefing. "Private Chen, before we discuss your performance last night, I want you to tell me about your background. What made you decide to join the Marines?" Sarah sat up straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "My grandfather served in the Korean War, Staff Sergeant. He used to tell me stories about how the Marines never left anyone behind, how they took care of each other no matter what. When I graduated high school, I didn't have clear direction for my life. College felt like just going through the motions. The Marines offered purpose." Maria nodded, making notes. Family military history was common among recruits, but something in Sarah's tone suggested deeper motivations. "What did you do before enlisting? Any activities that might have developed the focus and listening skills you demonstrated last night?" "I practiced meditation," Sarah said simply. "Started when I was 15 because I had trouble with anxiety and concentration. My mother took me to a Buddhist temple in Sacramento where they taught mindfulness techniques. I kept practicing even after the anxiety improved because it helped me feel more connected to everything around me." This was the first piece of the puzzle. Maria had heard about meditation and mindfulness training being used in some military applications, but she had never seen it applied so effectively in a practical situation. "How often did you practice?" "Every day for about an hour, usually early morning before school or work. During basic training, I had to adapt the practice because we didn't have private time, but I found ways to incorporate the breathing and awareness techniques throughout the day." Maria leaned forward with interest. "Did you consciously apply those techniques during last night's exercise?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant. When I saw how the other Marines were struggling, I realized they were fighting the conditions instead of working with them. In meditation, you learn that resistance creates suffering. If you accept difficult circumstances and look for opportunities within them, solutions become visible." The explanation was starting to make sense, but Maria knew there had to be more to it. The level of precision Sarah had demonstrated required more than just philosophical acceptance of difficult conditions. "Walk me through exactly what you did differently from the other Marines." Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Everyone else was trying to force their shots through the fog, using their equipment to penetrate the conditions. I decided to work with the fog instead. I closed my eyes first to focus on listening. The targets weren't completely silent, they moved slightly in the breeze, creating small sounds. I could use those sounds to confirm their exact locations. "But how did you manage to see them well enough to aim accurately?" "The fog wasn't uniform," Sarah explained. "It moved in layers and pockets. If you watched carefully, you could identify brief moments when density shifted and visibility improved just enough. The key was patience, waiting for those moments instead of forcing shots when conditions were worst." Maria made more notes, beginning to see how Sarah's meditation practice had given her tools that other Marines lacked. The ability to remain calm under pressure, the patience to wait for optimal conditions, and the sensory awareness to notice subtle environmental changes, these were skills that could potentially be taught to others. "Private Chen, I'm going to ask you to help me develop a training program based on your approach. But first, I need to verify that your success wasn't just luck. Are you willing to repeat the exercise under different conditions?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Maria spent the rest of the morning making preparations. She contacted the range safety officer to schedule additional night training sessions. She also reached out to Captain Williams, the company commander, to explain the situation and request permission to develop an experimental training protocol. Captain Williams was initially skeptical. "Rodriguez, we've had our best marksman try that drill. If one Marine managed to succeed, it was probably just a statistical anomaly. You know how these things work, eventually someone gets lucky." "Sir, I don't think this was luck. Private Chen has a systematic approach that could be taught to others. I'd like permission to test her technique with a small group of volunteers." "Fine," Captain Williams said after a moment. "But I want documented results. If this is going to become part of our training protocol, I need proof that it works consistently." That afternoon, Maria assembled a group of 12 Marines who had volunteered to participate in the experimental training. She included some of the Marines who had failed the previous night's exercise, as well as several others who had struggled with the night target practice in previous weeks. Sarah was assigned as an assistant instructor, which was unusual for a private first class, but Maria wanted to see if Sarah could effectively communicate her techniques to others. The first session took place that evening just as the fog began rolling in from the coast. Maria had set up targets at the same distances as the previous night, but she added audio recording equipment to document the sounds Sarah had mentioned. She wanted to understand every element of Sarah's approach before trying to teach it to others. Sarah began by explaining her meditation-based preparation techniques. "The most important thing is to calm your mind and body before you even touch your rifle," she told the group. "In stressful situations, our natural tendency is to rush and force solutions. That approach fails in conditions like this." She demonstrated the breathing exercises she used, showing the Marines how to slow their heart rates and clear their minds of distracting thoughts. Several of the Marines looked skeptical. This wasn't the kind of training they had expected in the military. But Maria encouraged them to keep open minds and try Sarah's methods. "Now we're going to practice listening," Sarah continued. "Close your eyes and tell me what you hear." The Marines followed instructions, though some clearly felt uncomfortable with the exercise. After a few minutes, Sarah asked them to share what they had noticed. The responses varied widely. Some heard only the obvious sounds like wind and distant traffic. Others began to pick up more subtle audio cues like the creaking of target frames and small changes in the fog's movement patterns. "Sound travels differently in fog," Sarah explained. "It can help confirm what your eyes can't see clearly. But you have to train yourself to listen actively, not just hear passively." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah guided the Marines through a series of exercises designed to develop their sensory awareness and patience. They practiced identifying target locations using only audio cues. They learned to observe the subtle movements and density changes in fog. Most importantly, they practiced maintaining calm focus under simulated pressure. When it came time for live fire exercises, the results were mixed but encouraging. 3 Marines managed to hit 2 targets each, which was better than anyone had achieved in weeks. 2 others hit 1 target, and the rest still struggled. But even the Marines who didn't hit targets showed improved form and more deliberate shooting patterns. Maria documented everything carefully. She noted which aspects of Sarah's training seemed most effective and which Marines responded best to different elements of the program. The breathing and meditation exercises appeared to help everyone, even Marines who remained skeptical about their value. The listening skills took more time to develop but showed promise for Marines who practiced consistently. Over the following week, Maria ran similar sessions every night. The fog conditions varied, sometimes thick and sometimes moderate, which allowed her to test Sarah's techniques under different circumstances. Gradually, more Marines began to succeed at the exercise. By the end of the week, 8 out of 12 volunteers could consistently hit at least 3 targets in conditions that had previously resulted in complete failure. Captain Williams observed one of the final sessions personally. He watched Sarah work with a Marine who had failed every night drill for over a month. Using Sarah's techniques, the Marine managed to hit 4 out of 5 targets on his first attempt with the new approach. "How long did it take you to develop this method?" Captain Williams asked Sarah after the exercise. "I've been practicing meditation for 7 years, sir, but I only applied it to marksmanship after seeing the challenges other Marines faced. The specific techniques we're using now developed over the past week through trial and error." Captain Williams turned to Maria. "Rodriguez, I want you to document this thoroughly and prepare a formal training proposal. If we can replicate these results with other units, this could significantly improve our night combat readiness." As the weeks progressed, word of Sarah's success began to spread throughout the base. Marines from other companies started asking questions about the new training methods. Some were curious about the meditation and mindfulness elements, while others were simply interested in any technique that could improve their performance in challenging conditions. Maria found herself conducting informal workshops for other instructors, sharing what she had learned from working with Sarah. The techniques weren't just applicable to marksmanship, the principles of calm focus and environmental awareness had potential applications throughout military training. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to refine her approach. She worked with Marines who had different learning styles and backgrounds, adapting her teaching methods to reach those who struggled with traditional meditation techniques. She developed variations that incorporated movement and physical exercises for Marines who had difficulty with stillness and silence. The most significant breakthrough came when Sarah worked with a Marine who had partial hearing loss from a previous deployment. Traditional listening techniques weren't effective for him, but Sarah helped him develop enhanced visual awareness that compensated for his audio limitations. His success proved that the core principles could be adapted for Marines with different abilities and circumstances. By the end of the month, Maria had enough data to prepare a comprehensive report for higher command. Sarah's techniques had improved night target performance across multiple units. More importantly, Marines who learned the methods reported feeling more confident and prepared for challenging situations in general. The investigation that had started with one Marine's exceptional performance was becoming a potential revolution in how the Corps approached training for adverse conditions. Sarah had proven that success in impossible circumstances wasn't about luck or innate talent, it was about having the right tools and mindset to work with challenges rather than against them. 3 months after Sarah Chen's breakthrough on the Foggy shooting range, the Marine Corps' highest levels of command were taking notice. Colonel James Morrison sat in his office at Quantico, reviewing reports from Camp Pendleton that seemed almost too good to be true. Night target performance had improved by over 300% across units that had implemented what was now being called the Chen method. More significantly, Marines trained in these techniques were showing improved performance in other high-stress situations as well. The reports crossed his desk from various commanding officers painted a picture of transformation that extended far beyond marksmanship. Marines were demonstrating better decision-making under pressure, improved teamwork in challenging conditions, and reduced stress-related incidents during training. The psychological evaluation data was equally impressive. Participants in the program showed decreased anxiety levels and increased confidence ratings across multiple assessment categories. Colonel Morrison had seen plenty of training innovations come and go during his 28 years in the Corps. Most showed initial promise but failed when subjected to rigorous testing or real-world application. This was different. The results were being replicated across different units, different environments, and different types of Marines. The data was too consistent to ignore. He picked up his phone and dialed Camp Pendleton. "Get me Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Private First Class Chen. I want them at Quantico next week for a comprehensive demonstration and evaluation." Back at Camp Pendleton, Maria was conducting her largest training session yet. 45 Marines from 3 different companies were gathered on the range as fog rolled in from the Pacific. The conditions were perfect for demonstrating Sarah's techniques, thick enough to be challenging but not so dense as to make the exercise impossible. Sarah had evolved considerably as an instructor over the past months. What had started as informal explanations of her personal approach had developed into a structured curriculum with specific learning objectives and measurable outcomes. She had learned to communicate complex concepts in ways that different types of Marines could understand and apply. "Tonight we have visitors from other bases," Maria announced to the group. "Word about our success here has spread throughout the Corps. Remember that you're not just representing yourselves, you're demonstrating techniques that could help Marines in combat situations around the world." The visiting instructors and officers stood behind the firing line, observing with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Major Thompson from Camp Lejeune had been particularly vocal about his doubts. "I've seen meditation and mindfulness programs before," he had told Maria earlier. "They work fine for stress reduction in garrison, but combat is different. When someone's shooting at you, you don't have time to stop and breathe." Sarah stepped forward to address the assembled Marines. Her confidence as an instructor had grown dramatically, but she remained humble and focused on practical results rather than theory. "We're going to start with the same preparation routine we've been practicing," she said. "Remember that these techniques work because they help your body and mind operate more efficiently under stress, not because they eliminate the stress itself." The Marines took their positions and began the breathing exercises. Even the visiting officers could see the difference in their demeanor compared to typical pre-exercise nervousness. Instead of fidgeting and talking, the Marines were calm and focused. Their breathing was controlled and deliberate. Most importantly, they appeared confident rather than defeated by the challenging conditions. Now we'll practice environmental awareness, Sarah continued. Close your eyes and listen for target position indicators. The fog had thickened considerably since the session began. Visibility was down to less than 30 meters, conditions that would have resulted in complete failure just months earlier. But the Marines followed Sarah's instructions without hesitation, demonstrating the trust they had developed in her methods. As they progressed through the listening exercises, something remarkable happened. The Marines began calling out target positions with surprising accuracy. They could hear the subtle creaking of target frames, the slight whistle of wind passing through the target stands, and other audio cues that untrained Marines would never notice. Major Thompson stepped closer to observe. "How are they identifying specific targets just from sound?" he asked Maria quietly. "Watch," Maria replied. Sarah has developed a systematic approach to audio mapping. Sarah was indeed working with the Marines to create mental maps of the target area using only sound. They practiced identifying not just the presence of targets but their specific locations and distances. It was a skill that had obvious applications beyond marksmanship. The same techniques could be used for navigation, threat detection, and tactical awareness in any low visibility situation. When the live fire exercise began, the results spoke for themselves. The first Marine hit 4 out of 5 targets. The second hit 3 out of 5. By the time 10 Marines had completed the exercise, the success rate was averaging 3.2 hits per Marine, a level of performance that would have been considered impossible under these conditions just months earlier. But the most impressive demonstration came from a Marine who had joined the program only 2 weeks earlier. Private Martinez had struggled with anxiety and performance issues throughout his military career. He had failed the night target exercise multiple times before learning Sarah's techniques. Tonight, using the breathing exercises and environmental awareness methods, he managed to hit 5 out of 5 targets in near-zero visibility conditions. Major Thompson watched in stunned silence as Private Martinez stepped back from the firing line with a quiet confidence that seemed to transform his entire bearing. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted to Maria. "How long does it typically take to train Marines to this level?" "Individual results vary," Maria replied, "but most Marines show significant improvement within 2 weeks of consistent practice. The key is daily application of the techniques, not just during marksmanship training." The visiting officers spent the rest of the evening asking detailed questions about implementation, training requirements, and potential applications beyond marksmanship. They were particularly interested in how the techniques might be adapted for different military specialties and combat scenarios. Sarah found herself explaining concepts she had never expected to discuss in a military context. She talked about neuroplasticity and how regular meditation practice actually changed brain structure in ways that improved performance under stress. She explained the physiological mechanisms behind controlled breathing and how it affected heart rate variability and decision-making capabilities. "The science supports what we're seeing in practice," she told the group. "These aren't mystical or supernatural techniques. They're evidence-based methods for optimizing human performance that happen to work particularly well in military applications." Captain Rodriguez, who had been observing from the back of the group, stepped forward with a question that surprised everyone. "Private Chen, have you considered applying for officer training? The Corps needs leaders who can think beyond traditional approaches." Sarah looked genuinely surprised by the suggestion. "I hadn't considered it, sir. I've been focused on developing these training methods and helping other Marines succeed." "Think about it," Captain Rodriguez continued. "Leadership isn't just about rank and authority. It's about finding solutions that help others achieve their potential. You've already demonstrated that capability." The conversation continued late into the evening as the visiting officers pumped Sarah and Maria for every detail about implementation and results. They wanted to understand not just what worked, but why it worked and how it could be scaled across larger units. Major Thompson, who had arrived as a skeptic, was now taking detailed notes about resource requirements and training timelines. "If we implement this at Camp Lejeune, what kind of instructor training would be required?" he asked. "That's actually our biggest challenge," Maria admitted. "Sarah is exceptionally gifted at communicating these concepts, but not every instructor has her background or natural teaching ability. We're working on developing a train-the-trainer program, but it's still in early stages. Sarah nodded in agreement. Teaching these techniques requires understanding both the practical applications and the underlying principles. Instructors need to be able to adapt their approach based on how individual Marines learn best. Some respond well to technical explanations, others need more hands-on demonstration, and some learn better through visualization exercises. The discussion revealed the complexity of scaling successful innovations throughout a large organization like the Marine Corps. Success with small groups was one thing, but implementing change across thousands of Marines required careful planning and systematic approach to instructor development. As the evening wound down, Colonel Morrison called Maria with news that would accelerate everything they had been working toward. Rodriguez, you and Chen are coming to Quantico next week for a full evaluation by the Training and Education Command. If the results hold up under their scrutiny, we're looking at Corps-wide implementation within 6 months. The stakes had suddenly become much higher. What had started as one Marine's individual breakthrough was potentially becoming a fundamental shift in how the Marine Corps approached training for challenging conditions. Sarah and Maria would soon be presenting their work to the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership, with the possibility that their techniques could impact thousands of Marines around the world. But, first, they had to prove that their methods could work anywhere, not just in the familiar conditions of Camp Pendleton. The real test would come when they demonstrated the Chen method to Marines who had never seen it before, in conditions they couldn't control, under the scrutiny of evaluators who would be looking for any sign of weakness or inconsistency. The program that had begun with one foggy night and, for impossible shots, was about to face its greatest challenge yet. Success at Quantico would mean validation and widespread implementation. Failure would mean remaining an interesting footnote in the history of military training innovation. Sarah and Maria had 1 week to prepare for the most important presentation of their military careers. The flight from San Diego to Washington was the longest 3 hours of Sarah Chen's life. As the plane descended toward Dulles Airport, she stared out the window at the unfamiliar Virginia landscape and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building for days. Tomorrow morning, she and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would demonstrate the Chen method to a panel of Marine Corps generals and training experts who would decide whether their techniques became standard training or remained a curious experiment from Camp Pendleton. Maria sat beside her, reviewing their presentation materials for what must have been the 20th time. They had prepared meticulously, creating detailed training manuals, statistical analysis of their results, and video documentation of successful training sessions. But both women knew that the real test would be their ability to teach the techniques to Marines they had never worked with before, under conditions they couldn't control. Remember, Maria said quietly, we're not trying to convince them of anything mystical or revolutionary. We're simply demonstrating evidence-based techniques that improve performance under stress. The data speaks for itself. Sarah nodded, though her stomach continued to churn with anxiety. In 6 months, she had gone from being an unknown private first class to potentially changing how the entire Marine Corps approached training. The responsibility felt overwhelming, especially for someone who had joined the military seeking direction rather than planning to provide it. They were met at Quantico by Captain Sarah Williams from the Training and Education Command. Captain Williams had reviewed all their materials in advance and would serve as their liaison during the evaluation process. As they drove onto the base, she briefed them on what to expect. You'll be working with 20 Marines from different units who have never been exposed to your methods, Captain Williams explained. The evaluation panel includes 3 generals, 4 colonels, and representatives from the Marine Corps University. They're particularly interested in whether your techniques can be taught effectively by instructors other than Private Chen. This was the challenge Sarah had been dreading. While she had become confident teaching Marines at Camp Pendleton, those relationships had developed over time. Tomorrow, she would need to establish credibility and trust with completely unfamiliar Marines in just a few hours, then teach them complex techniques under the pressure of formal evaluation. They spent the evening at the base guest quarters, making final preparations and trying to manage their pre-performance anxiety. Sarah practiced her presentation in the mirror, working on projecting confidence while maintaining the humble, accessible demeanor that had made her effective with Marines at Camp Pendleton. What if the weather doesn't cooperate? Sarah asked Maria as they reviewed contingency plans. Our techniques work best in challenging conditions, but what if tomorrow is perfectly clear? Then, we adapt, Maria replied. We've practiced the methods in different environments. The principles are the same whether we're dealing with fog, rain, darkness, or artificial obscuration. The next morning brought exactly the conditions Sarah had feared, a clear, sunny day with excellent visibility. As they arrived at the training range, she could see the evaluation panels setting up observation positions and testing equipment. The 20 volunteer Marines were already assembled, looking skeptical and slightly annoyed at being pulled away from their regular duties for an unproven training experiment. Colonel Morrison approached them as they prepared their materials. "Chen, Rodriguez, I want you to know that this evaluation is being watched at the highest levels. The Commandant himself has expressed interest in the results. No pressure, but understand that successful implementation could impact thousands of Marines across the globe." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She had known the stakes were high, but hearing about the Commandant's interest made everything feel even more intense. She closed her eyes briefly and used the breathing technique she taught others, trying to access the calm focus that had served her so well on foggy nights at Camp Pendleton. The evaluation began with Sarah and Maria presenting their training methodology to the assembled panel. They explained the scientific basis for their techniques, showed video documentation of successful training sessions, and presented statistical analysis demonstrating improved performance across multiple metrics. General Patricia Hayes, the senior officer on the evaluation panel, asked pointed questions about implementation requirements and potential limitations. "Private Chen, your results at Camp Pendleton are impressive, but that environment is unique. How do you know these techniques will work in desert conditions? In urban environments? In actual combat situations where stress levels are exponentially higher?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but answering it in front of a panel of generals was different from practicing in her quarters. "Ma'am, the core principles are based on optimizing human performance under stress rather than adapting to specific environmental conditions. We've tested variations in different settings, including simulated urban environments and high-stress scenarios. The breathing and awareness techniques actually become more effective as stress levels increase, because that's when the contrast between trained and untrained responses becomes most apparent." "Show us," General Hayes said simply. The demonstration phase began with Sarah working with the 20 volunteer Marines. She had 90 minutes to teach them techniques that typically took weeks to master, then demonstrate their effectiveness under evaluation conditions. The challenge was compounded by the clear weather, which meant she would need to create artificial adverse conditions for the marksmanship demonstration. Sarah started with the basic breathing exercises, explaining how controlled respiration affected heart rate, fine motor control, and decision-making under pressure. She could see skepticism on several faces, but she pushed forward with the same patient confidence that had worked at Camp Pendleton. "I know this seems unusual for military training," she told the group. "But I'm asking you to judge these methods by their results, not by whether they fit your expectations of what military training should look like." She guided them through progressively more complex exercises, teaching environmental awareness techniques and stress management strategies. The Marines gradually became more engaged as they experienced the practical effects of the breathing exercises and began to understand how sensory awareness could improve their tactical capabilities. Staff Sergeant Kim, one of the volunteer Marines, raised his hand with a question that made several others nod in agreement. "Private, this is interesting, but how does it apply when someone's shooting at me? I've been in Afghanistan. Combat isn't about staying calm and listening to subtle sounds. It's about reacting fast and staying alive." Sarah had faced this question before, and she knew that credibility with combat veterans was crucial for acceptance of her methods. "Staff Sergeant, you're absolutely right that combat requires rapid response. But these techniques don't slow down your reactions, they help you make better decisions faster. When your stress response is controlled rather than chaotic, you process information more efficiently and make fewer mistakes under pressure." She asked Staff Sergeant Kim to participate in a demonstration. Using stress-inducing exercises that simulated combat pressure, she showed how controlled breathing helped maintain fine motor control and situational awareness even when adrenaline was high. By the end of the exercise, Staff Sergeant Kim was nodding thoughtfully. "I see what you mean," he said. "It's not about being calm, it's about being controlled." The breakthrough moment came when Sarah addressed the clear weather conditions that threatened to undermine the marksmanship demonstration. Instead of trying to work around the good visibility, she used it as a teaching opportunity. "Today's conditions are actually perfect for learning these techniques," she told the group. "When you can see clearly, you can focus on understanding the principles without fighting environmental challenges. Once you master the methods in good conditions, applying them in adverse conditions becomes much easier." She set up a modified version of the night target exercise using distance and timing challenges rather than visibility problems. Marines had to engage multiple targets in rapid succession while maintaining controlled breathing and environmental awareness. The exercise was designed to create stress and test the techniques under pressure without requiring fog or darkness. The results were immediate and dramatic. Marines who applied Sarah's breathing techniques showed improved accuracy and faster target acquisition. More importantly, their performance remained consistent throughout the exercise instead of degrading under pressure like untrained participants typically experienced. General Hayes observed the exercise closely, taking notes on individual Marines' performance and asking technical questions about the training methodology. Private Chen, how long did it take you to develop proficiency with these techniques? Ma'am, I've been practicing meditation for 7 years, but the specific military applications developed over about 6 months of working with different Marines at Camp Pendleton. However, most Marines show significant improvement within 2 weeks of consistent practice. And how long would it take to train instructors who could teach these methods effectively? Sarah glanced at Maria before answering. This was the question that would determine whether their program could scale across the Corps. Ma'am, we estimate about 4 weeks of intensive instructor training for Marines with teaching experience, possibly longer for those without prior instructor background. The key is understanding not just the techniques themselves, but how to adapt them for different learning styles and personalities. The evaluation continued through the afternoon with increasingly complex scenarios designed to test the limits of Sarah's methods. The Marines practiced the techniques under simulated stress, in unfamiliar environments, and with various equipment configurations. Throughout each exercise, their performance remained consistently better than baseline measurements taken before training began. The most challenging test came when the evaluation panel introduced unexpected changes mid-exercise. Just as Marines were settling into their practiced routines, evaluators would change target distances, add time pressure, or introduce equipment malfunctions. Sarah's training emphasis on adaptability and awareness proved crucial. Marines using her techniques adjusted more quickly and maintained better performance than control groups using standard training methods. As the day concluded, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about their demonstration. The Marines had responded well to the training, the techniques had proven effective under evaluation conditions, and the panel seemed genuinely impressed by the results. But she also knew that military decision-making involved factors beyond just performance data. That evening, Maria and Sarah waited anxiously in their quarters while the evaluation panel deliberated. They had done everything possible to demonstrate the value of their methods, but the final decision was out of their hands. The call came at 2,100 hours. Captain Williams requested their presence at an immediate briefing with the evaluation panel. As they walked across the base in the darkness, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been an unknown Marine struggling to find her place in the Corps. Now, she potentially stood on the verge of influencing how the military trained warriors for the challenges of modern combat. General Hayes was waiting in the conference room with the other panel members. Her expression was unreadable as Sarah and Maria took their seats. Private Chen, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, General Hayes began, the evaluation panel has reached a unanimous decision regarding implementation of your training methods. Sarah held her breath, trying to maintain the controlled calm she taught others while awaiting words that would determine the future of everything they had worked to build. The Chen method will be implemented as an experimental program across 3 Marine expeditionary units within the next 60 days. Pending successful results from that expanded trial, we'll consider Corps-wide adoption. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the implications of the decision sank in. Their techniques would be taught to thousands of Marines across different units and deployment scenarios. If successful, the methods could eventually reach every Marine in the Corps. Private Chen, General Hayes continued, you'll be promoted to corporal and assigned to the Training and Education Command to oversee program implementation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will serve as program director. Congratulations, you've potentially changed how we prepare Marines for the challenges they'll face in combat. As they left the conference room, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. What had started as one Marine's individual breakthrough on a foggy night had become a program that could impact the effectiveness and survival of Marines worldwide. The real work was just beginning. 2 years after the Quantico evaluation, Corporal Sarah Chen stood on a different kind of training range. This one was in the mountains of Afghanistan, where Marines from the 2nd Battalion were preparing for a night operation that would test everything the Chen method had taught them. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the sun disappeared behind jagged peaks, and a sandstorm was building on the horizon, conditions that would have spelled certain failure for traditional night target training. Sarah watched through binoculars as Staff Sergeant Martinez, one of her first instructor trainees from Quantico, guided a squad of Marines through pre-operation breathing exercises. These weren't the same Marines she had worked with at Camp Pendleton or Quantico. These were combat veterans preparing for actual missions where the techniques she had developed might mean the difference between life and death. The Chen method had evolved considerably since its initial implementation. What had begun as marksmanship training in foggy conditions had expanded into a comprehensive approach to performance optimization under stress. Marines were using the techniques for everything from explosive ordnance disposal to medical procedures under fire. The core principles of controlled breathing, environmental awareness, and adaptive thinking had proven applicable across virtually every aspect of military operations. The statistics were impressive enough to satisfy even the most skeptical commanders. Units trained in the Chen method showed 30% fewer performance degradation incidents under stress, 25% faster adaptation to new environments, and significantly improved decision-making scores in high-pressure scenarios. More importantly, from Sarah's perspective, Marines reported feeling more confident and prepared for challenging situations. But the real validation came from stories like the one Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had shared during Sarah's last visit to Camp Pendleton. A Marine named Williams had used Chen method techniques during a night patrol in Iraq when his unit came under fire in zero visibility conditions. Instead of panicking or firing randomly like untrained Marines might have done, Williams had used the breathing exercises to maintain control and the environmental awareness techniques to identify the source of enemy fire. His accurate counterfire had saved 3 Marines' lives and allowed his unit to successfully complete their mission. Corporal Chen, Staff Sergeant Martinez called from the training area, "Would you like to observe the final exercise?" Sarah nodded and made her way down to the range. The sandstorm was intensifying, creating conditions that were arguably more challenging than the fog that had started everything at Camp Pendleton. Visibility was virtually zero, wind was creating constant noise that masked audio cues, and blowing sand was affecting equipment function. These were exactly the kind of impossible conditions that the Chen method had been designed to address. The Marines took their positions with the calm confidence that Sarah had learned to recognize in properly trained troops. Their breathing was controlled despite the approaching storm, their movements deliberate rather than hurried. Most importantly, they appeared focused on working with the challenging conditions rather than being defeated by them. The first Marine, Private Johnson, approached the firing line and began the preparation routine that had become standard for Chen method trained troops. He closed his eyes and spent nearly a minute simply breathing and listening, despite the wind and blowing sand. When he opened his eyes and raised his rifle, his movements were smooth and controlled. His first shot rang out across the range. Through the storm, they heard the distinctive sound of a hit. 4 more shots followed with similar precision. Private Johnson had hit all 5 targets in conditions that would have been considered impossible for traditional training methods. The pattern continued as more Marines completed the exercise. The success rate wasn't quite as high as they achieved in controlled training environments, but it was dramatically better than any unit could have managed using conventional techniques. More importantly, the Marines maintained their composure and systematic approach throughout the exercise, demonstrating the psychological benefits of the training even when perfect accuracy wasn't possible. As the exercise concluded, Sarah reflected on how far the program had come since that first foggy night at Camp Pendleton. The Chen method was now taught at every Marine Corps training facility, had been adapted for different military branches, and was being studied by law enforcement agencies and civilian emergency responders. What had started as one Marine's personal breakthrough had become a fundamental shift in how organizations approach training for high-stress situations. The most gratifying development had been seeing other Marines take ownership of the techniques and develop their own innovations. Staff Sergeant Martinez had created variations for urban combat scenarios. Sergeant Kim had adapted the principles for vehicle operators. Lieutenant Torres had developed applications for pilot training. The Chen method had become a foundation for continuous improvement rather than a rigid set of prescribed techniques. Sarah's role had evolved as well. She was no longer just teaching Marines how to shoot accurately in fog. She was training instructors, developing curriculum for different specialties, and working with researchers to understand the neurological and physiological mechanisms that made the techniques effective. Her work had attracted attention from civilian neuroscientists and performance psychologists who were studying how her methods could be applied beyond military contexts. The personal cost of her success had been significant. Sarah rarely saw her family in California, had missed her sister's wedding while conducting training in Japan, and had little time for the personal meditation practice that had originally inspired her military innovations. The demands of implementing a Corps-wide training program had consumed virtually all of her time and energy. But moments like tonight reminded her why the sacrifice was worthwhile. Watching Marines successfully complete impossible training exercises meant that those same Marines would be better prepared for actual combat situations. Every successful training session potentially translated to saved lives in real operations. As the training group packed up their equipment, Sarah was approached by Private Rodriguez, a young Marine from Texas who had joined the Corps just 6 months earlier. He looked nervous but determined as he addressed her. "Corporal Chen, I wanted to thank you for these techniques. I was really struggling with confidence during training exercises. The breathing methods and awareness skills have made a huge difference for me. I feel like I can handle whatever comes up now." Sarah smiled, remembering her own early struggles with confidence and direction when she first joined the Marines. "Private, the techniques only work because you put in the effort to practice them. The confidence you're feeling comes from your own hard work and dedication. Ma'am, I was wondering if there might be opportunities to help teach these methods to other Marines. I know how much they've helped me, and I'd like to help others have the same experience." The request was familiar. Sarah received similar inquiries from Marines regularly. The Chen method had created its own community of practitioners who wanted to share what they had learned with others. It was a level of enthusiasm for training that Sarah had never seen in traditional military programs. Private Rodriguez talked to Staff Sergeant Martinez about the instructor development track. "We're always looking for Marines who understand these techniques deeply and can communicate them effectively to others." As the evening wound down and the Marines returned to their quarters, Sarah remained on the range for a few minutes, watching the sandstorm clear and stars become visible in the desert sky. The conditions that had seemed impossible just hours earlier were already improving, reminding her of one of the core lessons of the Chen method: challenging circumstances were temporary, but the skills developed to handle them lasted forever. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria, now a master sergeant overseeing Chen method implementation across the Pacific Theater. The message was brief but meaningful. "Saw the reports from tonight's exercise in Afghanistan. Outstanding results. The program is being extended to Army Rangers and Navy SEALs next quarter. You should be proud of what we've built." Sarah typed back quickly, "We built it together. None of this would have happened without your support and vision." As she walked back toward the base buildings, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. She had joined the Marines looking for direction and purpose in her life. What she had found was an opportunity to help others discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The Chen method had started with 4 shots fired through impossible fog on a California training range. It had become a program that helped Marines around the world perform better under the most challenging conditions they would ever face. But, more than that, it had demonstrated something fundamental about human potential: that with the right techniques and sufficient practice, people could accomplish things that seemed impossible. The fog that had challenged so many Marines at Camp Pendleton hadn't been an obstacle to overcome. It had been a teacher, showing them that success in difficult conditions required a different approach than success in easy ones. The Marines who had learned to work with challenging circumstances rather than fighting against them had discovered abilities that served them far beyond the shooting range. As Sarah reached her quarters, she realized that her own story wasn't finished. The Chen method would continue to evolve and expand, but there would always be new challenges requiring innovative solutions. Tomorrow would bring different weather conditions, different Marines to train, and different opportunities to prove that the impossible was simply a problem that hadn't been solved yet. She opened her laptop to review the next day's training schedule, already thinking about how to adapt the evening's lessons for the conditions they would face. The work continued, one Marine at a time, one impossible shot at a time, building capability and confidence that would serve them wherever their service to the Corps might take them. The legacy of that first foggy night at Camp Pendleton lived on in every Marine who had learned that mastery wasn't about avoiding challenges, but about developing the tools to meet any challenge with controlled confidence and adaptive skill. Sarah had pierced the fog not just with marksmanship, but with an approach to training that had changed how warriors prepared for the unknown difficulties they would inevitably face. The impossible had become possible, one Marine at a time.